welcome to the podcast. It's Destination Education, and we're here to discuss all things education. And what I like to do, if it's all right with you, is I like to start off, we all had an education of some sort. And if you don't mind, could you just tell us a bit about your education and how you ended up where you are today?
So I was born and brought up in Derby, which is in the middle of England, famous for its industrial heritage, not least the Rolls-Royce works, where not the cars, but the aero engines that power people around the world are made. And I went to a pretty ordinary local school, but I had the great benefit of some fantastic teachers, and particularly one who inspired me in the love of reading and the love of literature and drama in particular. So when it came to university, English was the obvious course that I would take, which I did. I went to University of York and then on to University of Durham. And because by that time I'd sort of decided that probably, at least for a short period of time, I wanted to be a teacher. I wanted to pass on some of the knowledge and understanding that I'd got in my own education. And I suppose I probably thought that would perhaps 5 or maybe 6 year gig, and then I go and do something else. But I landed a job at Oundle School in Northamptonshire, big boarding school in Northamptonshire, and the headmaster there was very supportive. So again, another key person in my life, my educational life, and he sort of said to me, it was probably in my second year there. He said, "Well, Melvyn, you obviously want to be a headmaster. So which route do you want to take?" And I must admit, I wasn't really aware that I wanted to be a headmaster. I sort of, I probably knew I wanted to lead something at some point, but whether it was a school or not, I wasn't entirely sure. So and so on that basis, I think, well, okay, I'll hang on for a few more years then, see how that goes. And before I knew it, I was actually, so after 7 years at Oundle, I applied for this job in South Wales, in Monmouth. I spent time here. As head of English and then academic deputy. So by this time, I had definitely decided I wanted to be in charge of schools.
The head of Oundle back then, how do you think he knew that you wanted to be a head? Because he was right.
I don't know what the signs I was giving off were, but I think he was a wise and sagacious man. Let's put it that way. So he perhaps recognised other people, or perhaps there were a number of us actually at that time in the common room who subsequently went on to headships. So I left Oundle to come to Monmouth first time in '93. And I'd had played a role by that time in the co-educational move to co-education at Oundle. I'd helped set up new boarding houses. So it was, so I had already had some experience of leading change in a very, very traditional school.
And so you started teaching at Monmouth in '93, was it?
93. I came here in '93 as head of English.
Yeah. And we'll talk about your time in Edinburgh, because you were there for, I think that was your longest posting. I want to ask you, because I was going to ask you, English graduate, that how your leadership approach might differ from a more business-like approach, because we're seeing a rise of CEOs nowadays as heads of school. But then I noticed that previously, prior to this position, you were indeed a CEO at Clifton, which again, a school I know and like. I just wonder how you kind of marry those two sides of your character.
Well, I think all schools are businesses, but their business is education. So I think I rather resist the idea that there is a sort of a distinct role for these days. I mean, there was a time when schools could not be particularly businesslike and get away with it, but I don't think that's the case for at least a quarter of a century, actually, probably longer. So I think the skill is in being able to make the business of a school work without it seeming too much as though the main reason for the existence of the school is to be a business. It has to be a business in order to be able to fulfill its function, particularly at the moment with the pressures that are on the world, let alone the schools, education and schools sector. Then not to be able to run a business, whatever your discipline is, it's going to lead to trouble. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I do agree. But it's interesting. I think I'm obviously speaking as a parent, a lot of parents listen to us, and I think it sits somewhat uncomfortably with some of us to see that actually your head of school is the CEO. And I don't know. What do you think about that?
Well, I think, the year I spent at Clifton was very much helping to set up their education group. It was called an education group, not a business group.
Right.
And the purpose of that, as with many other such groups, is to actually be able to enhance the education offered, because there is greater scope within a group to do that and to look for synergies between different schools and different parts of the organisation. to drive efficiency, but also to drive range and quality of provision. So I don't intrinsically think there is a conflict. There may sometimes be a tension, but in good schools that tension is managed, and so it shouldn't be apparent. I mean, I do tend to think that in schools it's sometimes the language of business which jars, and I think there is no reason why we shouldn't continue to have a tradition of academic discourse, so to speak, and consider our pupils and parents, particularly their parents in this sense, as partners rather than just customers, because we are partners in the business of bringing up children. So I think that's there is a balance to be struck, as in many things, in relation to that. But no school is going to survive if it can't control its costs and ensure that it's running efficiently.
Indeed. But Habs is not part of a group, is it? Because you've got the connection with the Livery.
It's a very different. It is in that sense, but we're not part of a group as such. But we're part of the family of schools of the Haberdashers Company. So along with Haberdashers Elstree, with the state schools that the Haberdashers have within their family. But all the schools are supported separately by their charitable endowment. So it's not quite the same as being in a group where essentially the finances are sort of pooled. We are to that extent still masters and mistresses of our own fate.
Maybe it would be good to explain, because obviously Outdoor is part of that. It took me ages to understand like the Livery, and could you just explain for people who don't understand how that works as a school, because it kind of goes back hundreds and hundreds of years, right?
It does. Many of the livery companies of London all the traditional ones are hundreds and hundreds of years old and were initially established by people doing the same trade. So the Haberdashers was established by people who were in the haberdashery industry, selling ribbon and other decorations for clothing. Became very popular in the Middle Ages and Tudor period.
Were they precursors to unions, these organisations?
Not really. They were more well, I suppose in some senses they were, in that they were efforts by people pursuing the same trade to protect their interests. So in that sense they were. But I think they were perhaps rather more entrepreneurial. I mean, they weren't dealing with an employer, for example. They were more, often they were lobbying government for relief from tariffs or for preserving the interests of their particular trade or calling. But of course, what happened over time was that the more successful of these, in this case, Haberdashers, and William Jones, our founder, was one of those. They amassed a lot of money. William Jones was a trader, not just in haberdashery, probably not mainly in haberdashery by the end of his life, but he became, when he died, he was apparently the richest man in Hamburg. So he was very entrepreneurial and very internationally minded in that sense. So they were, and people like William Jones were keen to keep their name going in perpetuity. And in a previous age, in a more Catholic age, they probably would have endowed chantries where prayers would be said in their memory and for their immortal soul. But by the time the sort of 17th century came along, it was sort of another way of doing it was to found a school in your name, and often a school and an almshouses. So looking at both ends of the spectrum, the children and the old people, and to make sure that happened, you wouldn't just sort of give the money in a will to your family or to a trust that was set up for that purpose. You would want to know that there was something that was going to be as perpetual as your aim for your school or almshouses. And so the obvious group of people to receive that money in trust was the fraternity that you had been part of during your life. And so that was really how the so many schools came to be founded and maintained by the livery companies, whether it's William Jones in Monmouth, or William Laxton at Oundle, or George Watson in Edinburgh, who did the same thing with the Company of Merchants, the Royal Company of Merchants in Edinburgh. Exactly the same principle.
Interesting. Yeah, no, I didn't understand it in that depth. Let's take a quick break to talk about something that can make all the difference for your child's educational journey. I'm thrilled to share that this episode is sponsored by Top Schools, your trusted partner in navigating the complex world of school applications. If you're aiming for a top independent school in the UK, Top Schools offers personalised consulting to ensure your child finds the very best fit with a guaranteed outcome. From identifying those best fit schools to crafting standout applications to invigilating the entrance exams, the expert team is with you every step of the way. Ready to take control of your child's future? Visit topscoresadmissions.com or click the link in the show notes to learn more and book a consultation today. Use the code DESTINATION for 20% off. That code is DESTINATION for 20% off personalised support for entry into a top independent boarding school in the UK. Now, back to our conversation. And then, so how do you feel, like, obviously we're seeing a lot of schools joining groups these days, but more for-profit groups, whereas you remain, as you say, as part of a group, but it still remains as a charity. So what do you think are the advantages that you derive from being part of that organisation?
Well, I think being a charity rather than for profit is, I mean, you can absolutely guarantee then that all the money that comes in to the school from fees and from commercial activity is focused solely on the education of the children in the school. So there is no profit motive, there is no dividend paid to investors or whatever. And I think from a parent point of view, that's quite an important thing to be able to say. And in our case, we also benefit from the fact that there is a significant endowment, which means that we don't have to just rely on our profit and loss account. We have endowment funds as well, which support education we can provide and can give us a long-term view, which schools that are solely operating for profit inevitably can't have quite that view.
I mean, just to play devil's advocate for a moment, there are a number of schools that are for profit or part of a for-profit group, and they would try to sort of, mitigate all of those potential risks of being a for-profit group. What's your view? Would you ever work for a school that was for part of a for-profit group?
Yeah, I think I'm great believer in a mixed economy. And certainly in uncertain times rather, having access to capital from investors or whatever is a key thing for schools. I mean, we're just lucky that we don't have to go that route because we have a charitable endowment, and so we can take a long-term view of where the school needs to be, the sort of provision we need to make for the future. And that is, I think in some sense we've got the best of both worlds. I'm certainly not decrying the for-profit sector in its entirety. And I would observe that some of the for-profit groups are doing a considerable amount more than some of the charitable schools in, for example, providing bursaries and widening access to independent education, and indeed diversifying the kinds of education they provide into special needs provision and all sorts of areas which perhaps traditionally had been provided by the charitable not-for-profit sector, and which is now more difficult to do. So no, I would certainly advocate a mixed economy.
And it's kind of old news, and just briefly then, VAT.
Yeah, not a good idea. It's taxing education is a bad idea. Full stop. I mean, just don't do it. Doesn't matter where it is, what it is. Education's a universal good, and we don't, in civilized countries, we don't tax universal goods. We don't tax healthcare. We shouldn't tax education.
But it's been done, and the chance of it being reversed
doesn't make it right.
Yep.
I mean, and I think the impact on the sector and its ability to be the sector it wants to be, not least being open, widening access, being a good community partner with state schools and with other charities, all those things are undermined, and it's a huge perversity really that a government that says that it's taxing education somehow to make things fairer simply means that the independent sector is less able to accept and to admit a wide range of children into its schools. But that is a political decision. The principled point is you shouldn't tax education.
And you have a very interesting view. I mean, you've done a lot of things. You've been the chair of both the HMC, the Headmasters Conference, and the British Boarding Schools Association. So I assume you visited like hundreds of schools over several decades. So you've got a very unique point of view, I would say. Have you ever done inspections?
Yes, I did. I did independent school inspections when I was here last.
I mean, I don't know if it's the same answer, what we were just talking about VAT, but obviously the sector is in a little bit of a crisis. What do you think is the biggest threat to the independent school sector? If it's not finances, is it something else?
No, I think, you can't get away from them. I mean, if you ask at the moment what's the biggest threat, obviously it's finances. I think longer term, it's our opportunity, but it's also a threat if we don't grasp it, to sort of move forward from this point and say, look, in most countries, the independent sector and the state sector work very closely together. In Australia, for example, there is a state subvention in their independent schools. They don't tax education, they actually subsidise it.
Mm.
And the Canadian government is very active in promoting its boarding schools internationally, obviously, as you're aware. So, yeah, there is a world where we're partners with government, and almost bizarrely, of course, we feature, the independent sector features in the UK government's international education strategy. So at the same time as we're being taxed and lambasted at home, we're being paraded abroad as part
Yeah.
of sort of Team GBNI, that's nice. It's good to see colleagues who are doing great work internationally being recognised in that way, but it is an irony. So I think we need to grasp the opportunity to say, look, we are part of Team UK, and we're a huge part of soft power for the UK. We are an export earner. Let's all be grown up about this and recognise the view. But we have to do our part in that. We have to make it easy for governments of whatever colour to understand actually what we do, and get alongside. My last job after I'd been chair of HMC was to chair the Partnerships and Public Benefit Committee, and to start to put in train a number of initiatives which working with colleagues in the state-funded sector to make that a reality, to start to make that a reality, and to find those things where independent schools can genuinely add value to what goes on in local communities and nationally.
Yeah. It's interesting what you say about Australia and Canada. And it was, I mean, Hong Kong, I'm based in Hong Kong, I'm sitting in Hong Kong right now. They also are supporting
Yeah.
private, we call it private
Yeah.
education, which is growing as we are seeing the equivalent of state schools close. Yeah, it's
Well,
tricky.
the ESF schools were always subsidised, weren't they?
Yes, and I believe that subvention, I think this is the last year, or last year was the
Yeah.
last year. And so that's in the past now. So
Yeah.
let's change tack a little bit, if you don't mind. I'd like to ask you, as a parent, are you a parent?
Yes, two children. Yeah, grown up and gone away, but still our children.
What was their, yeah, they're always children. I sometimes say adult children now. So what was their path?
So our oldest daughter went to the school that I was head of at the time. So went to Wyndham College and did very well. Went off to Oxford to read history, and having been to Istanbul as a member of the British delegation to the Model European Parliament, and that when she was at school, she decided that she wanted to live in Istanbul, so got a job in Istanbul when she graduated, and met her husband, and they now live there. And she works as a university counsellor for students in Turkey, not teaching, but teaching adjacent, I think we'd say. Our son also went to Wyndham and went to LSE and graduated from there. Brief career in executive search, and then decided that he also wanted to go into academe, so he got himself a master's and now works for University of Arts in London as an administrator. But his real love is his poetry. More an interesting story if I'd said, well, he's an engineer, or he's an airline, or she's an airline pilot or something. But no, that's not how it's turned out. But there you go.
No, but it isn't. I mean, it's interesting. So you've got this, you talk about something called the squiggly career. And so I guess your son has living proof of that in a way. Can you just explain like what that is? And also just for context, like I want to say that I've been talking to a lot of young people recently who have done technically very well. They've gone to Oxford or LSE or King's or whatever. They've become a medical doctor, or they've done. And then they're working, and 3, 4, 5 years later, they turn around in their mid-30s and something go, "What am I doing? What am I doing?" There's a lot of that happening if you speak to people. At least the people I've spoken to, as a pattern among people who are like early, mid, late 30s.
I think that's it's a bit of a function of the fact that, well, it's a considerable function of the fact that the sort of career path I've had, it probably doesn't exist even in education now, let alone in other industries where, in some way, although I'll come back to squiggliness in a moment, in some way, if I'd done nothing at all, I could be retiring in a couple of years from now, having happily spent 40 odd years of my, it's actually 40 years this year since I went to that, and I would have been I'm sure a perfectly content person having done that. But I think the realization that there's sort of a bit of a mismatch between the way that schools have traditionally thought about their careers preparation, which is is been very linear. It's about finding the right match. Now, what do you want to do? Yeah, let's have some software to tell us what you should be doing because of your interests. Right. To do that, you have to do this degree at that university, and and that linearity is just so old hat. And we've radically changed our approach to careers education, what many people, including ourselves, now call futures education here, to much more focus on the underlying skill sets and the fact that actually you need a whole range of skill sets. You can't be, perhaps as I did, it's not quite true, but I mean, I focused on literacy rather than numeracy, if you like to call it that, and that was fine. But I had enough numeracy to do my job, to understand a spreadsheet and all those sort of things. But I think now young people leaving need just to have a whole range of skills, because the squiggliness of career will take them, well, for one thing, they won't necessarily have the sort of careers that say, well, you can go and do that and you can go and do that, because they're going to be doing it all. And they will need to develop skills which are transferable from one industry to another, and certainly one job to another. And I suppose in my case, I did a bit of that, in the sense that I had a brief parallel career in politics, which, as I sometimes say, a brief and spectacularly unsuccessful career in politics, which is when I really decided that probably I was going to be leading a school rather than leading the country. And that, of course, brought a whole range of other types of experience with it. So I ended up being an election observer in Romania, for example, and running a town council and all sorts of things like that, which I wouldn't have experiences which were later helpful, and probably sort of expanded my hinterland of leadership experience in ways that I wouldn't have had if I'd simply remained all the time in the classroom.
Well, exactly. And I was going to ask, I'm interested to hear about the squiggliness, and I definitely think that needs to be added to the dictionary. And I don't disagree with you, but I just wonder if it's the system in the way that it is designed currently, certainly in the UK, that, children do need to decide their major from day dot. And it is pretty a sort of single discipline field of study, isn't it?
Yes, if you take the sort of the label on the tin as being all that you're interested in. So you're reading a history degree, but reading a history degree was never only about history. It was always about the underlying skills, and we've probably slightly overemphasized the difference between, I know, history and theology, for example, and in a way we've gone away from those traditions of liberal education, which said, actually, educate the person and everything else will follow. And the great universities, and I hope great schools as well, are still doing that. But my point is that we have to be more explicit about it, because I do have conversations with parents who are over concerned about choices at GCSE. Should he do drama? Why can't he might want to be in the creative industries. Well, I ended up qualifying as a drama teacher and never did drama at GCSE or at A level. But my English degree, I was interested in drama in my English degree, and that was more than enough. And I got my practical experience of drama elsewhere. So it's sort of I think it's part of the sort of commodification of education, and perhaps a slight lack of confidence that education is a good thing, whatever you're doing, and you will find your route at some point. And the higher the most important thing is you get the best education, the broadest education that you can, and that is not always expressed through the label on the tin of the courses that you're doing. And you certainly should look at what else goes around, and particularly at school. I do irritate my colleagues from time to time by saying, well, look, the most important things I ever learned at school went in the classroom, which is probably true. Didn't say that it wasn't quite important for me to get good A levels. That's not, these are not in opposition to each other. It is both true that the most important things I learned at school were outside the classroom, and that it was important that I got good A levels. So let's construct a school that does that. Well, actually, most UK independent schools absolutely do that. And what I worry slightly about is that there is a discourse in the UK which is a very utilitarian discourse, which says, actually, we need to just concentrate on those 9 subjects, and there's no merit in doing these. In fact, there was something on the news this morning about one of the politicians saying that creative arts degrees were worthless because they didn't lead to high value careers. Well, first of all, define high value. Secondly, if that's your utilitarian view of what the point of doing a university degree is, then you haven't really been noticing what's been going on in the world for the last 150 years, actually. And how dare you? Because those of us who think the creative arts are very important in themselves, irrespective of the fact that they lead to jobs in the creative industries, would like to have a debate about what the value of learning about theatre is, for example. to a society. That is, go back and ask the ancient Greeks whether they got better jobs because they had tragedy in their society and theatre in their society. It's the wrong answer to a wrong question, in my view.
Yeah, I'm just, again, from sitting, with a parent point of view, I guess it totally is a utilitarian approach. But as parents, I guess we're seeing that the tertiary higher ed institutions in the UK particularly, whilst they might say, like, some of them do interviews, but most of them don't, and whilst they might say that they value all of the other stuff, then as a parent or as a student, I'm thinking, well, actually, they don't really. They're only looking at the grades. So the most valuable thing I can do with my time is just get that A or A star.
Yeah. But that's assuming that these two things are separate. And I would contend that they're not in a properly organised school. And you have to do both. And the fallacy is to think, well, actually, my son or daughter will be better served by spending 12 hours a day studying English, let's say, rather than 10 hours a day doing that, and 2 hours a day working with others in a theatre, in my case. There's no way I would be doing the job I'm doing had I not made that time to get involved with drama. It's just obviously the case, and it didn't help. It didn't hurt me getting into university. Now I know things have changed, but I do think we should push back gently on the idea, because it's not about just getting through the gate into a good university. It's also what happens when you're through the gate, and how you've equipped yourself to develop as a human being, as an adult in that context. And that does need hinterland, and it does need an awareness that what awaits you at university is great and really will boost you intellectually and academically. But you will only be able to really take advantage of that if you've got some sort of intellectual food to feed that. And that comes from all the other things. Well, I mean, we've talked about the drama, but sport is if you actually take the life skills and the learning skills, study skills for that matter, from being involved in a sports team, and you sort of think, well, if we had to design an activity that was going to be supportive of a young person's intellectual growth, development, and becoming an effective adult and an effective member of the workforce, and we didn't have sport, we would probably design something like sport, something that required focus on particular skills. It requires working with others, requires different types of learning, different types of teaching, mentorship, etc. Has discipline, needs rigor, and is enjoyable, and makes you a healthier person. Then why wouldn't that be a good idea? So it's a whatever you do then, and whatever choice you make in terms of school or university, if it's simply about one grade point average slightly higher than at the expense of not doing all that stuff, then that is not in the long term the better solution.
No, I totally agree. And also when they get to university, they've got so much more time on their hands to do all the things that they're interested in, or not, as the case may be. Are these the sorts of are you having these sorts of conversations with parents? I imagine that parents.
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think it's funny in a way. As I say, in some ways, what's happening is I think we're rediscovering the root of the benefit of what used to be called liberal education, this sense of roundedness and holistic approach to education. And schools like Monmouth have never lost that, and we haven't been seduced by sort of just chasing grades. Not, as I say, there is any necessary contradiction between high grades and having lots of other good stuff. In fact, it's quite the reverse. So there is sometimes a conversation to be had just to reassure, perhaps, or certainly sort of reiterate that it's not just a nice to have. It is an essential part of the package.
Well, just tell us a little bit more about then this squiggliness. Like, what are you doing at Monmouth and the Futures programme?
Well, I say it is about being more intentional about all the things I've been speaking about. And I sort of went through the benefits of sport, for example. So whereas perhaps in the previous generation we would have said, well, it's important you're part of the netball team. Why? Well, netball is good. Netball is good for you. It's good sport. It's good to play in a team. Now we would talk about that more explicitly in terms of the things I talked about a few minutes ago, and point out that these are skills and attributes which are also to be seen in some of the ways in which we do teaching and learning, for example, collaborative learning, working on projects, doing research, presenting, building confidence, showing leadership, and so what we're calling the future's backpack, i.e. the things you should have in your backpack before you leave us to go on to university, and those are amongst those attributes, and you can develop them in different ways, complementary ways, but it's intentional that we talk about things in that way. And we've already seen, so we've rolled this out across the senior school already. It's also in the prep school, and we've just gone through GCSE choices, and I think it's tutors are reporting already in the first year rollout they're having deeper conversations about what the subject choices, what the reason behind subject choices, and less of the, well, I want to do X subject because why? Well, because I like the teacher, not a good reason, or because my friend's doing it. Okay, but not really a good reason. Or my dad says I should do it. Okay, we should listen to your dad, but you should also, that's not in itself the best reason. Now, what is it that subject's going to give you? How is it going to boost your backpack? If you are kind of uncertain about two subjects, can you think, well, is there another way that in my next 2 years in year 10 and 11, if I don't do that subject, I can pick up the same skill set by doing something else? And sort of really to sort of create more of a sense of a portfolio of experience of which the GCSE choices are the centre, rather than, as it might be, obsessing about the difference between doing history and geography, which is an important part of the conversation, but it's not the only bit of the conversation that we should be having.
And all these other sort of extracurricular activities, whatever it is that they're enjoyable. I mean, I hear you saying, we're being more intentional about having these sorts of conversations, but to me it also feels like it's a little bit of a shame that we've kind of lost sight of what is common sense in a way. If we have to be very intentional about speaking to parents that it's good that your child does whatever they're interested in. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do. And none of this is about not saying, well, in fact, the last slide in the presentation I used in year 9 parents was do what you enjoy.
Yeah.
Because joy can get sort of eroded or indeed expunged from education if you're not careful. So this is not really replacing that. It's just sort of giving another route map to make decisions which makes, and I say giving another sort of narrative through which those decisions can be, or prism through which those decisions can be seen, and making sure. And one of the challenges I've set staff is, we tend to think schools tend to think in terms of their journey through prep into senior school, from senior school joining senior school to GCSE, from GCSE to going to university. Okay, let's ask ourselves what then question, which is 10 years after leaving here, wherever our students have got to, we hope it'll be what they're doing, what's fulfilling, and they should be able to look back on their experience at school and be able to see what it was at school that helped them to get where they are 10 years later. And that is the acid test. And I hope that we'll sort of follow that through and sort of ask that question at alumni events, and get that feedback, because that, I think, is to the attitude which says, well, look at our A-level results, aren't they shiny? Look at our Oxbridge results, aren't they shiny? Actually, yeah, they are great, and we're not decrying that, and that's important, really important. But so what? Now, what? And if the answer, going back to my squiggliness, and various career swerves that we can take, and if part of what that is that we've given those young people the confidence to career swerve effectively and to try a few things out, and to be that little bit more self-aware and analytical about themselves and the opportunities that they've got, then that in itself will be a great thing, because that will, I'm absolutely sure, whatever else happens in the next 10 years, will be one of the things which is wholly different, or very significantly different, from the experience of my career as I described it earlier. So I think that's what we owe our young people, that we have to understand that the world is changing rapidly, that some of the answers are actually in just refinding our traditions and our confidence in scholarship. But that has to be accompanied by an awareness of the sort of support and infrastructure we need to put in place to help them navigate their way intentionally and intelligently through school and into the world beyond. I was saying to incoming senior prefects for next year, we need you to model and exemplify the sort of young person that we need to support and create, mold in the future, because none of us quite know what that is anymore. We're not churning out lots of accountants or colonial administrators in generations past. We've got to be giving young people the confidence to deal with uncertainty and to deal with that with respect and with an ethical framework and the personal skills that are most likely to mean that they can thrive in that world. And that will help them, it'll help their families, it'll help society to deal with what's coming.
Perfect. That's our soundbite right there. We're running out of time, but we said we have to go back and sort of deal with some of the mechanics of it. We said that we would talk about co-ed or single sex, because I think you came into Monmouth like a year after it moved from Monmouth boys to a co-ed. And I talked to heads of girls' schools mainly, because the number of boys' schools is, I can count them on one hand. What's your view, just briefly, on?
Well, I mean, there are. So I went from here to be the head of Old Swinford. My first headship which was a boys' school. So I mean, I think there are good boys' schools, good girls' schools, and good co-educational schools.
Yeah.
For my preference, I think so. Both our children went through co-educational schools. That was absolutely right for them. I think by default, probably co-education is the more obvious route. We live in a co-educational world, but that is not to say that there are individuals for whom single sex is better. Say that, and it is not to say that there aren't some fantastic boys only and girls only schools that are doing a brilliant job for their children and young people. So it's I think we're fortunate still to have choice in education, and that is one of the choices that parents need to have to be able to do the right thing for their children.
Very diplomatic answer. Well, for a parent who's listening to this, we deal with a lot of parents. We're looking at admissions, finding the fit, like choosing a school. So we visit a lot of schools, and it's hard, it's hard for schools to sort of differentiate themselves. So if you're meeting a parent, what is the question that they should be asking you if they have a chance to meet you, to understand?
I think that question that we're asking ourselves at Monmouth about what happens in 10 years' time is quite a good question to ask ahead, because it frankly, as a head, I'm being asked that sort of question. It's a lot easier to talk about so GCSE A-level results and the university destinations, because you've got the data and you can point at it. But actually having to articulate what the school's impact is on young people in the medium long term, that's much more testing.
But what's your answer? So the question is, in 10 years' time, like...
The answer I would give is that we are aiming to make sure that young people leave this school with the confidence to deal with an uncertain world, and with the tools to thrive, and to be competitive in that world. And we can't guarantee that's the case, because we won't know that until at least 10 years. But we can bring our professional skill and experience to building a curriculum and building a life, really, at school, a school like this, which is most likely to result in that level of success and the ability to thrive.
Yeah, fair enough. And that's answered my last question as well, which is like legacy. But so you'll have to then follow up with your graduates, like in 10 years' time, and sort of have a chat
that'll
with
be
them
very interesting.
what they're up to. Will you still be there in 10 years' time?
We already know. Well, probably not in this role, but I hope I'm still welcome around Monmouth in 10 years' time, or wherever else. One of the things about coming back is I'm meeting quite a lot of the boys I taught as English at GCSE and A-level to, who are now dads, which is great.
Yeah, that makes you feel old, right?
But it's quite, I mean, it sort of answers my question about what have I done to get them to where they are. Well, I taught them GCSE, that's what I did.
Yeah. And then we didn't touch on, you were 10 years at George Watson in Edinburgh, right? And that's a boys' school and that's a day school, is that correct?
No, it's a fully it's an enormous fully co-educational day school. So 2,500 children and young people, 3 to 18. So it's all on one site. So we claim to be, and I think it's true, the biggest single site independent school in the UK. And it was a great experience. I mean, Edinburgh is a fantastic city. Watson's a fantastic school. 10 years was the right sort of duration to do that job. We went through COVID. We went through all sorts of those not good things, but lots of fantastic things as well. The extraordinary experience of being when the late Queen died, and she laid at rest in Edinburgh, and for 3 or 4 days, the whole world was looking at the city, and we were part of that in various ways. That's extraordinary experience.
But very different to Monmouth, right?
Yeah, well, a bit bigger, but it's and my Squiggly career has taken me to, there aren't many people I suspect who have been heads of schools in England, Wales and Scotland. So I'm used to to sort of finding. I mean, I think all the places I've worked in and lived in have been really special in their own way. The lovely sunny spring morning here, and I can look out my window and see the hills and the River Wye is just about sort of 300 meters from where I'm sitting, and I wish I had time to go for a walk rather than it being a busy day with governors' meetings. But if I'm lucky, I'll perhaps be let off before it gets dark and have a bit of a stroll. So it's a great place to be, and a great place to learn as well.
I hope you do. I was going to say, you have a very busy day. You've got to run a school, but thank you for taking the time to have a chat with me. Thank you so much.
No, it's been great to talk, Ruth.
Thanks for listening. If today's episode sparked questions, or if you're ready for support with UK boarding school admissions, we're here to help. Reach out to us at www.topschoolsadmissions.com or follow the link in the show notes. Your child's exceptional UK boarding school educational journey starts with a conversation, so let's have a chat.